The snow came early to Ohio that year, before Thanksgiving even had a chance. It didn't fall in a furious blizzard, but slow and deliberate, like a heavy silence settling over the land. It wrapped our old suburban neighborhood in a white blanket, and the sounds of the world went quiet. For me, Harry, a 70-year-old widower whose life had long since become a series of familiar rituals, that quiet was a mercy. It made the loneliness of my house, a house that once echoed with my wife Martha's laughter and the thunder of our son's small feet, less deafening, almost peaceful. Martha always loved the first snow. "It's like a blank canvas, Harry," she'd say, looking out the window. "A chance to start over." God, I missed her wisdom. Tonight was Christmas Eve, the day that had always been the peak of our family's year, the epicenter of warmth and light. Now, 5 years since she'd been gone, it had become an annual test of my own endurance, a desperate attempt to hold on to the fraying threads of what we once called a family. The tradition was dinner at my place. I clung to it like a drowning man to a piece of driftwood, because if I let that go, what was left? I'd spent half the day on my feet. I brought the dusty cardboard boxes down from the attic, each one filled with Christmas ornaments that were shards of a time long past. My fingers, calloused from decades of woodworking and chalk dust from my teaching days, carefully unwrapped the delicate tissue paper. There it was, our first glass angel, bought at a flea market the year we were married. Its wing had been carefully glued back on, a memory of the day a clumsy teenage David had knocked it off the mantel. And there, a lopsided paper lantern, the handiwork of my son's tiny glue-sticky fingers. I remember the pride in his eyes when he gave it to me, declaring it the most beautiful lantern in the world. To me, it still was. I hung these treasures on the full branches of the spruce, breathing in the thick, piney scent that mingled with the smell of my home. The smell of old wood, beeswax furniture polish, and the faint phantom scent of Martha's perfume that seemed to have soaked into the very walls. For a moment, it felt like it used to. Like any second, the door would open and she'd walk in, carrying her famous apple pie. But the door stayed shut, and only the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner broke the silence. By 6, everything was ready. The turkey, rubbed with Martha's secret blend of herbs, was resting in the oven, filling the kitchen with an aroma so divine it made my stomach rumble. The cranberry sauce simmered on the stovetop, glowing like a ruby. On the fireplace mantel, nestled among years of old Christmas cards, I lit the candles. Their flames flickered, casting a warm, living light on our wedding photos. Her, so young and laughing, with a whole lifetime in her eyes. And me, a skinny kid in a rented tux who couldn't believe his luck. I straightened my best sweater, the last one Martha ever gave me for Christmas, and sat in my armchair to wait. At 6:30, punctual as a train schedule, bright xenon headlights flooded the driveway. My son David's enormous black Ford Explorer pulled up silently, its power and newness a stark contrast to my modest 1950s clapboard house. I'd spent nearly 2 hours that morning shoveling the driveway with my old snow shovel, my lower back groaning in protest. For them, so it would be easy for them. The door swung open, letting in a blast of frigid air and my family. There was David, my 45-year-old son, a successful financial analyst with a permanent look of mild anxiety etched on his face and a Swiss watch on his wrist that cost more than my annual pension. Beside him, his wife, Jessica, a woman with a perfect blowout and a curated smile, for whom life was an endless Instagram photo shoot, and people were props. Trailing behind them, like shadows, were my grandkids. 19-year-old Liam, a college freshman, and 16-year-old Chloe. Their faces were illuminated by the bluish glow of their smartphones. They glanced up for only a fraction of a second to mumble a vague, "Hey, Gramps." "Hey, Dad, you're looking good," David said, giving me a hug. It wasn't a real hug, more of a perfunctory pat on the back, a gesture performed out of protocol. He smelled of expensive cologne, sandalwood, and citrus. A different generation, different smells. My own father had smelled of sweat, motor oil, and honest work. "Harry, your place is so authentic," Jessica cooed, her eyes scanning my living room. Her voice held the polite condescension of a curator visiting a small-town museum. "These paper garlands. I didn't know they still made these." I knew what she meant. Their house, which I'd only seen a couple of times, reminded me of a hospital operating room. White walls, gray furniture, chrome fixtures. Their Christmas tree, which I'd seen in photos, was a designer creation in a strict silver and blue color scheme. Every ornament was a perfect uniform sphere, like soldiers on parade. Not a single lopsided lantern, not one repaired angel wing. No history. "It's about memory, Jessica," I said quietly, trying to keep my voice steady. "For me, Christmas isn't about style. It's about memory." The dinner became what I had feared most, a painful pantomime. The clinking of silverware against my late wife's china was deafening in the silence. I tried my best to bridge the chasm that separated us. "So, Liam, how's college? What are your best classes?" I asked, turning to my grandson. He didn't look up from his phone. "So fine," he grunted, his thumbs flying across the screen. "Chloe, have you thought any more about what you want to do after high school? I remember you were getting pretty good at drawing." She sighed, a dramatic, world-weary sound, as if I'd asked her to explain quantum physics. "Gramps, who even thinks about that now? It's like 2 years away." David and Jessica, sensing the awkwardness, started their own conversation about their ski trip to Aspen. They discussed the price of lift tickets, booking a chalet, some mutual acquaintance named Brad, who just bought property there. They spoke in their own language, the language of money and status, and I felt like an immigrant who couldn't understand a word. I sat at the head of my own table, in my own home, a complete stranger. A ghost from the past, whose presence was merely a tradition they'd be happy to phase out. Finally, the main course was finished. Time for dessert. My moment to shine. The apple pie from a recipe that had been in Martha's family for generations. "I'll go get the pie," I announced, forcing a cheerful tone. I stood and walked to the kitchen. I paused there for a moment, leaning my hands on the countertop. My chest ached with a dull, heavy sadness. I had looked forward to this evening for so long, prepared so much, and all it brought was a cold, bitter alienation. That's when I heard them. The door to the hallway was slightly ajar, and their voices carried with brutal clarity. It was Jessica speaking, her voice a low, sharp hiss. "David, I swear to God, this is the last time. I can't do this anymore. Coming to this time capsule, the smell of mothballs, these tacky decorations. He's just getting too old for all this. It's depressing. He's just in the way, shuffling around with his endless stories. He ruins the whole holiday for us. Next year, let's just send a gift basket and be done with it." There was a second of silence. I held my breath, praying with every fiber of my being that my son, my blood, my boy, whose tears I had wiped away when he scraped his knee, would object, that he would defend me, say one word in his father's defense. But all I heard was his tired, defeated whisper. "Jess, I know. Calm down. We'll figure something out. I'll talk to him about Silver Willows after the holidays." something inside me snapped. It was a sound so loud I was sure the whole house must have shaken. It wasn't a thread. It wasn't a rope. It was a thick, steel cable that held the last of my faith in family, in love, in basic gratitude. A burden, in the way, too old for Christmas. The pie in my hands suddenly felt impossibly heavy, its weight pressing down on me like a tombstone. The aroma of cinnamon and baked apples, so cozy and welcoming just a minute ago, now turned my stomach. I stood there, frozen, my knuckles white as I gripped the hot dish, staring at a spot on the wall. A coldness that started in the center of my chest began to spread through my veins like a slow-acting poison, freezing my blood. I don't know how long I stood there. A minute. An eternity. Finally, I forced myself to take a deep, ragged breath. I straightened my back. I put on a mask. The mask of the calm, good-natured teacher I had perfected over 40 years of dealing with unruly teenagers. I walked back into the living room. "Help yourselves," I said, my voice perfectly even as I set the pie on the table. They dug in with gusto, noticing nothing. Not my dead white hands, not the emptiness in my eyes. They finished, offered their cursory, "Thanks, that was delicious," and quickly gathered their things. They pulled on their expensive coats, and 15 minutes later, they were gone, disappearing into the swirling snow. I was alone. I didn't clear the table. I just sank into my old armchair by the fireplace and stared at the tree. The gifts I had chosen with such care over the last few weeks lay beneath it in a bright, deceitful pile. A brand new laptop for Liam to help with his fine studies. A bottle of French perfume for Jessica, the one she'd casually mentioned by name. An elegant Swiss watch for David, which I'd set aside money for from my pension checks for 6 months. The latest iPhone for Chloe, so she could ignore the world with greater efficiency. It all looked like ridiculous, pathetic junk now. A monument to my blindness. A tribute to my own foolishness. A burden. In the way. The words hammered in my head like a blacksmith's sledge. And with every merciless blow, something began to rise from the depths of my memory. All the things I had spent years hiding from myself, making excuses for, plastering over with a father's love. The truth. The night wrapped the house in its dark embrace, but I didn't turn on any lights. What for? The darkness in the room was just a pale reflection of the darkness that had consumed my soul. The colored lights on the Christmas tree cast trembling, distorted shadows on the walls, turning the familiar room into a courtroom where I was the only one on trial. I sat huddled under an old wool blanket Martha had knitted years ago, but the cold wasn't coming from outside. It was radiating from within, from the icy chasm that had opened in my chest. And in that penetrating chill, memories began to surface like drowned men. They were sharp, clear, and merciless in their detail. First came the memory of this house, not as it was now, quiet and old but young, creaking, smelling of fresh paint and hope. 1978, Martha and I, two young school teachers with thin wallets and big dreams, scraped together the down payment. It was a real fixer-upper, a leaky roof, rotten window frames, and a yard choked with weeds. But the foundation was solid, and a mighty oak tree stood in the backyard. "We can do this, Harry," Martha had said, and I'd believed her. To get the money, Martha sold a thin gold necklace and earrings, all she had left from her mother. I spent 3 summer breaks not fishing at the lake, but hauling cement bags and hammering nails on a construction crew under a blistering sun. I can still feel the dull ache in my back and taste the grit of concrete dust. I refinished these hardwood floors myself, sanding my hands raw. I replaced the rotten window frames with my own 2 hands. Martha and I hung wallpaper together at night after our teaching jobs, laughing as we got covered in paste. Every crack in the ceiling, every creak in the floorboards was a part of our story. David was born here. I remember marking his height on the doorframe in pencil. This mark for his first step. This one for his first day of school. I hung a tire swing from that oak in the backyard, and his joyful laughter seemed to soundproof the world from all worry. This house wasn't just property. It was our ark, built with our own hands, cemented by our love. And now, they wanted to ship me out of this ark to some upscale retirement home, so they could sell it and maybe buy another chalet in Aspen. Then, like a frame from an old movie, the memory of David's college years materialized. He was a smart kid, the pride and joy of Martha and me. And of course, he set his sights on a prestigious private university with a top-tier business program, one with a tuition that was astronomical. Our teachers' salaries were a drop in the bucket. I remember that sleepless night, Martha and I sitting at the kitchen table, the moonlight illuminating a stack of bills. We sat in a silence that was heavier than any words. The next morning, I went to the bank. I can still see the condescending look on the loan officer's face when I, a public school teacher, asked to take out a second mortgage on our home. $80,000. A sum that made it hard to breathe. I signed the papers, feeling like I was signing away our peace of mind for the next 10 years. I'll never forget David's face when I told him the money was there. He jumped up and hugged me. A real hug, tighter than he had in years. "Dad, I'll pay you back. You'll see. Every single cent. I'm going to be a success and buy you and Mom a house on the ocean," he'd said, his eyes shining. He never paid it back. He never bought the house. And I never asked. I was a father. Fathers don't send their kids a bill. He got his degree, his ticket to the world of big money. And for the next decade, I gave the bank a huge chunk of my paycheck every single month. Martha and I forgot what vacations were. We mended old clothes. We counted every dollar. It was all for his future. Then came the wedding. Lavish, expensive, exactly what Jessica wanted. Her parents, good, hard-working people, told them honestly they couldn't afford it. I saw Jessica's lip tremble and David's face fall. So I stepped in again. Martha and I had a savings account, our dream fund. We had been putting money away for years for a trip to Italy. We wanted to see the Colosseum, walk the streets of Florence, sit in a little cafe in a Roman piazza. It was our shared, cherished dream. I went to the bank and withdrew everything. $25,000. I handed it to David. "Start your life together beautifully," I told him. "You deserve it." Jessica cried with gratitude then, kissing my hands and whispering, "You're a saint, Harry. I'll never ever forget this." Turns out she had a short memory. For Martha and me, Italy remained a picture in an old issue of National Geographic. 2 years after that wedding, she was diagnosed with cancer, and everything we had left went to doctors and treatments that couldn't save her anyway. And finally, the most painful memory of all, his first business venture failing. He decided he was a startup genius, poured everything they had into some vague tech idea about optimizing social synergy. A year later, the bubble burst. He called me at 3 a.m. The voice on the other end wasn't a grown man. It was the sobbing of a terrified boy. He was on the verge of bankruptcy. The bank was about to foreclose on their house. He cried that he had failed Jessica, that he was a nobody. And what did my father's heart do? It broke for him. The next morning, I did something I swore I would never do. I sold my 1968 Ford Mustang. It wasn't just a car. It was a piece of my soul. I'd bought it as a rusted-out wreck and spent 10 years, bolt by bolt, piece by piece, restoring it in my garage. That car was a symbol of my youth, of my own two hands being able to create something beautiful. I sold it. And I sold my stamp collection, which I'd been building since I was 10. I scraped together nearly $50,000. I gave it to him. It's just stuff, son. The important thing is that you're okay. He took the money. He promised to pay it back. I didn't ask. He got back on his feet. And I've been driving this old, rattling pickup truck ever since. And the grandkids, Liam and Chloe. When they were little, I was their world. David and Jessica were always working, building their careers, and I was the default babysitter, chauffeur, and tutor. I taught Liam how to throw a baseball in the backyard. We built the world's tallest Lego tower together. I read bedtime stories to Chloe until she fell asleep, her tiny hand clutching my finger. But then they grew up. They got friends, smartphones, their own lives. I went from being the center of their universe to a convenient utility. When Liam turned 17, I bought him his first car, a used but reliable Ford Focus, so he wouldn't have to depend on his parents. I spent almost all of my savings at the time, $7,500. He was over the moon. Thanks, Gramps. You're the best. Tonight, he couldn't even look up from his new phone. Each memory was a fresh slap in the face. I hadn't just given them money. I had given them my time, my dreams, my health, my future. I had silently sacrificed myself, believing it was my sacred duty as a father. Martha always said, "A family is like a garden, Harry. You reap what you sow. You put in love, you get out love." On that cold Christmas night, I understood with terrifying clarity that my garden was choked with the weeds of ingratitude, and I was the old, withered tree they were planning to uproot so it wouldn't spoil the view. I looked at the silent phone. It was officially Christmas Day. Not a single call, not a single text. Just an absolute, ringing silence. Christmas morning brought no relief. The sky outside was a sheet of leaden, joyless gray, a perfect mirror for the landscape of my soul. I hadn't slept a wink. I'd spent the night replaying scenes from the past, each one clicking into place to form an ugly mosaic of my life. A life where I was merely the donor for someone else's happiness. I mechanically made myself coffee. Black, bitter, no sugar. Just like my reality. The phone remained silent. No Merry Christmas, Dad. No, how are you doing, Gramps? The silence was so thick you could almost touch it. Out of years of habit, a desperate grasp for routine, I picked up my old tablet and opened Facebook. And that was the second blow. The knockout punch. The one that drove the last of the air from my lungs. There, on Jessica's page, gleaming with a glossy sheen, was a fresh post from an hour ago. A series of perfectly filtered photos. There they were, the four of them. David, Jessica, Liam, and Chloe, huddled together by their giant professionally decorated Christmas tree. They were all wearing matching red and white plaid Christmas pajamas I'd never seen before. They were smiling wide, blinding smiles for the camera, performing the part of the perfect happy family. The next photo showed them ecstatically opening gifts from elegant-looking boxes. A third showed them laughing, holding up glasses of sparkling champagne. The photos were clearly from last night after they left my house, or perhaps from that morning, their real Christmas. The caption dripped with phony sentimentality. The perfect Christmas Eve with my favorite people on earth. So incredibly grateful for these magical moments and for the family we've built. I wasn't in the pictures. There wasn't a single mention of me. It was as if the dinner at the old man's house had never happened, as if I had been neatly airbrushed, not only from their holiday, but from the very timeline of the previous evening. This wasn't an oversight. This was a deliberate, public statement of omission. A declaration that their life, their real, beautiful life, happened without me. They had even brought the matching pajamas with them. It was all planned. The visit to my house was just an inconvenient formality, a prelude to their actual celebration, one not worth documenting. I stared at their shining, false faces, and a wave washed over me. It wasn't pain. It was a cold, pure, distilled rage. Not the hot, screaming kind, but a calm, focused anger. The anger of a man whose kindness had been mistaken for weakness for far too long. And at that exact moment, as if on cue, my phone rang. The screen lit up with one word: David. For a split second, a foolish, vestigial hope flickered in my heart, the last reflex of a father. Maybe he saw the pictures and felt a pang of shame. Maybe he was calling to apologize, to wish me a proper Merry Christmas. I swiped to answer. Dad, hey, Merry Christmas. His voice was unnaturally cheerful, but I could hear the strain underneath. He was clearly reading from a script. You too, son. Listen, Dad. Jessica and I were talking a lot last night, and we're worried about you, about your future. This house. You've got to admit, it's just too much for one person. The upkeep, the property taxes, security. Anyway, we found this amazing place. An elite retirement community. It's called Silver Willows. It's got round-the-clock care, medical staff, a swimming pool, activity groups. You wouldn't have to worry about a thing. The point of no return had been crossed. He'd hit bedrock and just kept digging. I was silent, letting him finish his slick, soulless sales pitch. So that was it, the true reason for the call. Not a greeting, not an apology. The final phase of their plan. They didn't just want to edit me out of their Christmas. They wanted to evict me from my home, from my past, from my life. The house I had built with my own hands, the house whose every nail I knew, whose every board held a memory of Martha, was now just a valuable asset to them. A piece of real estate in a neighborhood whose property values had gone up. They wanted to sell it and check me into a gilded cage called Silver Willows, so I wouldn't be underfoot with my memories, messing up their perfect picture. A burden. In the way. Too old. All the pieces of the puzzle slammed into place, all the pain, all the hurt that had tormented me through the night, suddenly evaporated. It burned away, leaving nothing behind. In its place was an ice-cold, crystal-clear, absolute certainty. The years of patience, the years of blind fatherly love, the years of self-deception, it all crumbled to dust. The scales fell from my eyes. I no longer saw my family. I saw strangers. Cold, calculating people who looked at me as an obstacle on their path to even greater comfort. I took a deep breath. The air filled my lungs and I felt my spine straighten. I'll think about your generous offer, David, I said, my voice eerily calm, almost indifferent. I heard a sigh of relief on the other end. Really? Oh, Dad, that's fantastic. It's the right move, you'll see. We'll help you with the move, hire the best movers, handle everything. I said I'll think about it. I cut him off, and my voice had a firmness it hadn't possessed in years. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have things to do. I hung up before he could reply. I stood up slowly and walked to the Christmas tree. My gaze fell on the pile of presents beneath it. The laptop, the watch, the perfume, the iPhone. Symbols of my own foolishness. Symbols of their greed. And in my mind, now as clear and cold as a winter sky, a plan took shape. It wasn't a plan for revenge, not in a petty, spiteful way. Number. It was a plan for justice. A plan that wouldn't get me my money back, or their love. It would get me back the one thing they had taken from me: my dignity. The decision that solidified in the cold silence of my home didn't bring me a sense of spiteful glee, but a strange, almost surgical feeling of relief. It was as if a heavy tumor I'd been carrying for decades had finally been diagnosed, and now I was about to perform the operation to remove it. I was no longer a passive victim of my circumstances. I was a man about to take a scalpel and cut the lies out of his own life. My eyes fell again on the brightly wrapped boxes under the tree. A garish, screaming lie tied up with silk ribbons. Every one of those items was bought with my modest pension, with money I could have spent on myself, on a new roof, on that trip I'd always dreamed of. Each box was an investment in love that had turned out to be an investment in a void. In that instant, they ceased to be gifts for me. They became resources, assets, and I was about to liquidate them in my own way. My hands were steady now. My movements became precise and measured, like a mechanic starting a complex engine build. The first thing I did was make a phone call, not to David. I looked up the number for St. Jude's Shelter, a small, perpetually underfunded charity on the rougher side of town. I remembered Martha sending them a check for $20 now and then. "It's not much, Harry," she'd say, "but if everyone gives a little, it becomes a lot." After a few long rings, a woman with a tired but incredibly warm voice answered. She introduced herself as Mrs. Evelyn Peterson, the shelter's director. "Mrs. Peterson, good morning. My name is Harry Miller. I'm sorry to bother you on a day like today. I'd like to make a donation. I paused, choosing my words carefully. Quite a few Christmas gifts, brand new, in their original packaging. Electronics, perfume, things like that. Would it be possible for me to bring them by today?" There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. Then Mrs. Peterson asked, her voice full of disbelief. "Mr. Miller, it's Christmas Day, and you said, a lot of gifts. Are you sure?" "I'm absolutely sure," I replied, my own voice unwavering. "I have a feeling the people you serve will have a much greater need for them than the people I bought them for." Her voice cracked, and I could hear the emotion in it. "Oh my goodness. Yes, of course. Bring them any time. Harry, we would be so incredibly grateful. Our address is—" I scribbled it on a notepad, though I already knew where it was. And then the work began. I became a machine, moving boxes. I hauled them from under the tree and carried them out to my old Ford F-150, the laptop for Liam, who thought his grandfather was a caveman who couldn't operate a smartphone. The watch for David, who only valued time that could be converted into currency. The bottle of French perfume for Jessica, who wrinkled her perfect nose at the old person's smell of my home, and the latest iPhone for Chloe, to help her shut out the real world more completely. I loaded them into the bed of my pickup, and with every box, I felt like I could breathe a little easier. It was a physical and mental cleansing. I wasn't getting rid of expensive things. I was getting rid of the weight of false hope and unreciprocated sacrifice. When the last box was loaded, I went back inside. In the drawer of an old dresser, under a stack of yellowed photographs of Martha, was an envelope. My rainy day fund. About $2,000 in cash I'd saved over the years for a major repair or a medical emergency. I tucked the thick envelope into the inside pocket of my coat. The drive through the sleepy, snow-covered city was like a meditation. The streets were nearly deserted. Soft, feathery snow was falling, and the world seemed clean and new. For the first time in many, many years, I didn't feel lonely. I felt free. Free from expectations, from hurt, from the need to prove myself to anyone. I wasn't driving away from something. I was driving toward it. St. Jude's shelter was housed in an old but solid two-story brick building surrounded by bare trees. Mrs. Peterson, a short, stout woman in her 60s, with a face etched with kindness, was already waiting for me on the porch, an old shawl wrapped around her shoulders. When she saw the bed of my pickup piled high with festive, colorful boxes, she froze and put a hand to her chest. "Dear Lord in heaven," she whispered, her eyes wide with astonishment. "I thought you meant a couple of shopping bags." I silently lowered the tailgate and started unloading. Soon, drawn by the activity, people began to emerge from the shelter to help. A few sullen-looking teenagers whose faces held more weariness than youth. A couple of staff members. They worked in silence, but with an efficient rhythm, carrying the boxes inside. I could see the curious faces of small children pressed against the windows on the first floor. We brought everything into a common room. A modest but decorated tree stood in the corner, adorned with handmade ornaments of paper and pine cones, so much like the ones I treasured. A few elderly people sat in worn armchairs along the walls. Their faces were tired and distant, but as the mountain of gifts grew in the middle of the room, a spark of interest lit their eyes. I could have just driven off then, my mission accomplished, but I stayed. Mrs. Peterson offered me a cup of hot instant coffee, and I gratefully accepted. I helped them unbox some of the gifts to figure out how best to distribute them. I saw the pure, unadulterated, almost shocking joy on the face of a freckled boy of about 10 when he was handed the massive Lego set I had bought for Liam. I saw the silent tears rolling down the cheeks of a frail, elderly woman when Mrs. Peterson gently draped the soft, warm cashmere shawl meant for Jessica around her shoulders. I struck up a conversation with one of the old-timers. His name was Bill. He'd been sitting quietly in a corner, just watching. Turned out he was a Vietnam vet, a former Marine. Just like me. We talked for almost an hour about Saigon, about the monsoons, about friends we'd lost, about how the world moves on and forgets. He didn't think I was a burden. He listened. He nodded. He asked questions. He understood me without needing words. In that 1 hour in the drafty hall of the shelter, I received more human warmth and genuine understanding than I had in the last 10 years from my own family. Before I left, I walked over to Mrs. Peterson. I pulled the envelope of cash from my pocket. "Take this. It's for a proper Christmas dinner, or for medicine, whatever you need most right now." She looked at the thick envelope, then at me. Her eyes filled with tears. She didn't say a word. She just took my rough old hand in both of hers and squeezed it tight. In that simple gesture, there was more gratitude than in all the words I had ever heard from my own kin. And one last thing, my final act. I asked her for a piece of paper and a pen. On a plain sheet from a notepad, in my neatest teacher's handwriting, I wrote out not a letter, but an itemized invoice. It was brief, dry, and dispassionate. An invoice for a debt of gratitude. University tuition via second mortgage, $80,000. Wedding gift from Trip to Italy Fund, $25,000. Business bailout from sale of 68 Mustang and stamp collection, $50,000. First car for grandson, Liam, $7,500. 20-plus years of unpaid labor as babysitter, chauffeur, tutor, and financial backstop, priceless. At the bottom, I added a few lines. "David, I always considered these to be gifts, given out of love. But I realize now that love and respect are two-way streets. Since I have become a burden whose house you are already mentally selling, I have decided to redirect my future investments to those who can appreciate them. Don't worry about my Christmas. I'm having a wonderful day in fine company, the best I've had in 5 years. P.S. The matter of selling the house in Silver Willows is now closed, permanently. I folded the sheet neatly, slipped it into a clean envelope, on which I wrote a single word, David, and handed it to Mrs. Peterson. If a man named David Miller comes looking for me, and he will, please give this to him. Of course, Harry, she said softly, her eyes full of understanding. I drove home through the darkening streets. The Christmas lights in other people's windows no longer made me feel lonely. The house greeted me with silence, but it was a different kind of silence. Not oppressive, but calm, healing. The space under the Christmas tree was virginally bare, and it was beautiful. I made myself a proper cup of tea, sat down in my armchair, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt like the master of my own house and of my own life. I didn't have to wait long. The performance had to reach its finale. I sat in my armchair, reading a worn-out old Hemingway novel, and felt the tension that had been my constant companion for years slowly drain from my body. I wasn't feeling spiteful. I was feeling peaceful. The peace of a man who has finally spoken the truth. The phone rang around 7 o'clock, when the world outside was completely dark. It was David. His voice was an octave higher than usual, and it was ringing with barely contained panic. Dad, where are you? We came by. We wanted to wish you a Merry Christmas, bring you your gift. The door was locked. We knocked. We looked in the window and the house. There's nothing under the tree. What happened? Were you robbed? My God, I'm calling the police. I let him finish, listening to his torrent of feigned concern all the way through. Then, calmly, weighing each word, I answered, There's no need for the police, David. I wasn't robbed. I gave it all away. A profound silence fell on the line. It was so deep I could almost hear the gears grinding in his head as he tried to process the information. What did you give away? He asked, his voice softer now, tinged with confusion. The gifts, I said, my tone perfectly even. Every last one of them. The laptop, the watch, the perfume, the iPhone. I took them to St. Jude's shelter. There were people there who needed them a lot more. You... What? His voice cracked into a full-blown shriek. In the background, I could clearly hear Jessica's piercing squawk. He did what? Are you out of your mind, old man? That laptop cost $2,000. My watch. Dad, have you finally gone senile? No, son, I replied, and there was no anger or hurt in my voice, only a cold, unshakable steel. For the first time in a long time, I feel I am of perfectly sound mind and memory. I heard your conversation with Jessica in the kitchen last night. I saw your perfect family photos on Facebook this morning, and I received your business proposal regarding Silver Willows. I got the message. I'm a burden. So I've decided to stop being a burden and start being a philanthropist. You know, they didn't seem to think I was a burden at the shelter. They were very, very grateful. I paused again, letting my words find their target, like precisely aimed arrows. By the way, I left something for you at the shelter. With the director, Mrs. Peterson. If you want any answers, I suggest you drive over there and pick it up. It should be an educational experience for you. And with that, I hung up, giving him no chance to respond. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes, picturing the scene. My son, red-faced with rage and confusion, speeding across town in his luxury SUV to a poor neighborhood on the outskirts. I pictured him walking, with a grimace of distaste, into that old building that smelled of bleach and soup. I pictured Mrs. Peterson, her face unreadable, silently handing him the envelope, and I pictured him tearing it open and reading my dry, emotionless invoice. I wasn't gloating. I was feeling a sense of satisfaction at the restoration of a universal balance, at the truth, however harsh, finally being told. The weeks that followed were the most peaceful of my life in recent memory. They didn't call. I didn't expect them to. I didn't have time for them. I was busy. I finally cleared out the junk in my old garage, wiped down the workbench, and took out my dusty but still sharp woodworking tools. The smell of fresh sawdust filled my days. I made simple things: bookshelves, birdhouses, new frames for old photos of Martha. The honest, monotonous work of my hands healed my soul better than any therapist could have. I called Bill, the vet from the shelter. We met at a local diner that serves the best $2 coffee in town. We sat there for 3 hours, and I learned he was a hell of a chess player. We started meeting every week. Sometimes we'd just sit in a comfortable silence, watching the cars go by. I had made a friend, and then one day, in February, when the sun was starting to shine a little brighter, I did something I had dreamed of for 30 years. I walked into a small travel agency downtown and bought a plane ticket. One way, to Rome. I decided I was going to see the Colosseum. I was going to see it for me, and for Martha. Spring arrived. I was out in the garden we had planted together, pruning her beloved roses, feeling the damp, warm earth give its energy to my hands. My house no longer felt empty or lonely. It was filled with quiet, with peace, with the smell of wood, and with my own plans for the future. It was on one of those clear April days, as I was on my knees in the garden, that the phone rang, an unfamiliar number. I wiped my earthy hands on my jeans and answered. "Dad?" David's voice was unrecognizable. It was quiet, broken, stripped of its usual arrogant confidence. It held a note I hadn't heard since he was a little boy. Maybe it was remorse. Maybe it was just the shock of a reality that had shifted under his feet. "Dad, can we talk?" I slowly straightened up, feeling the warmth of the sun on my face. I looked up at the clear, endless blue sky, and for the first time in many, many years, I smiled. It wasn't a bitter smirk or a polite mask. It was the calm, peaceful smile of a man who has walked through a storm and come out on the other side. A man who had gotten back, not just his house, but himself. "I'm listening," I said. And I knew, whatever came next, the ball was now in my court.